Howdy folks, I'm Aaron, and in this video I'm going to be telling you about how to create a fantasy story using ChatGPT 4.0, which is available on the ChatGPT Plus subscription model. We're going to be using a version of the engine called DeepGame. If we look at DeepGame here, you can see it's got pretty good reviews, and I had a fun time with it. I've actually been messing with this story on here for probably a good 15-ish hours at this point. So I've actually played with it to a point where I know the basic things that I want to happen in the story. I went through and used a tool as it was probably originally envisioned being used, meaning that like it prompts you and you say what you do next, and everything is told in like a first-person present tense. I went ahead and tweaked some of the prompts on this, and I'm having it output to me in third-person past tense, which is commonly how a lot of stuff is written, especially fantasy novels. So let's go ahead and take a look here at what we've got. Here's the initial prompt that I gave it. Basically, I've told it we're going to play a fantasy story that's written in the third-person past tense. I detail information about the main character and a little bit of information about the setting. This is actually the second version of this prompt that I fed into it, because the first one, what I did not include in the first one was specifics about what was going to happen in the opening scene. And when I didn't include specifics that said like Alaric enters Mistvale, and then I also prompted it, give a sense of the emotions he feels as he enters Mistvale, But when you don't prompt it for specifics, it's going to do, it's going to go whichever way the wind blows, as the algorithm is chomping down, and the AI is deciding which word should follow the next one. So when in that original prompt, basically it went too far too fast in the story. So I went back to give it prompts to be specific so it would slow down and describe this opening scene, right? In this one, in the opening scene, the main character ends up hearing this melodious voice. Here's a picture that it generated of the opening scene. So he hears this melodious voice. As he's going through, this talks about how he feels. He's filled with a mix of awe and anxiety as he enters the Mistvale. It talks a little bit about some of the background information that I gave. This character, this mage, is a storm mage, and he is fleeing a town that has been destroyed by the forces of the demon king, whom I have named Zarazak in the story. All right, so he follows the sound of this voice, and he eventually comes to this place where he sees this woman who is one of the Sylvaneth, which is a name that I prompted the AI to give me as like possible names for a race of forest elves. So that was the one that I landed on. So this forest elf woman is tending to this wounded deer, and she notices the character, and they have this exchange. And as they go through, the characters introduce themselves, and basically, ultimately this woman whose name is Lirena, I believe, she ends up giving him directions so he can make it to the next part of the story. Why is it not loading the next section? Let me go ahead and load that. Oh, here we go. Not sure why it decided to stop there. Oh, and at this point, okay. At this point, as we're going a little bit further and we leave, I decided to ask it to stop generating images. Now, I think the images that it generates are really interesting. The problem is, from like a narrative standpoint, they're not really things that you could use in any sort of a published product, because they're inconsistent, right? One of the cool things about ChatGPT 4.0 it's really good at keeping track of details and making sure the characters are pretty consistent from one scene to the next. At least they have the same general abilities and personality traits, but like the images are all over the place. So you've got, if you've got a character, if I scroll back up here a little bit further, like here's the main character in this scene, right, in this opening scene, and then here he is. You kind of see the back of him, so you can't really tell what's going on, but then now he's got white hair in this scene, right? So every time the AI generates a new image, it's kind of luck of the draw what you get. It's not consistent, so it's not really something that you could use, I think, to generate picture-by-picture stuff that's going on scene by scene. The text is better, though, right? So in any case, I say stop generating images. Another advantage of telling it to stop generating images is it seems like it gives you longer passages of text. The outputs that you get from DeepGame, if you see how long they are with the pictures, a lot of times they're a lot shorter than they are when you don't use the pictures. It's like with the pictures take up some amount of the output that it gives you. So here's what happens kind of next in the story. As the main character here, Alaric, who's a storm mage, is following this path to the castle. He decides he remembers some of the etiquette that involves the race of the forest elves, the Sylvaneth, and he chooses 3 gifts that he will present the queen when he arrives there. And one's a leaf, one's some flowers, and one's like a luminous stone or a valuable gem, something along those lines. So here we have the next part where we come to him arriving at the gates where there are some guards. Now let me show you some of these prompts here that I've given you so far. I gave it a lot at the very front end where I established what the main character was, who the main character was, some basic descriptive information about him. Also, I put down some baseline information about this race called the Sylvaneth, and I established this character, Queen Tatiana, who is the queen of the Enchanted Forest, which is known as Mistvale, and the queen lives in this castle known as Glenspire Castle. So I have these baseline facts that I'm feeding into the system that are going to be pertinent to these scenes and essentially what is going to amount to intro chapters. I wouldn't call each of these a chapter. I actually went back later and decided where to put the chapter divides. But in any case, so here we are. He gathers these different gifts. And then we come to the next part, and here's what I prompt. It says, "What do you do next?" Well, when I'm writing everything to it, basically I'm describing the characters in third person, which is the way I want it to write. I'm not sure if it matters whether I do that or not, but I figure it might as well be consistent with the way that I want it to output to me, so it doesn't get confused. So Alaric arrived at the gates where which were watched by 2 Sylvaneth guards. Their armor appears as though it had been forged from overlapping leaves. That's actually an idea I got from a previous iteration of this story when I was kind of just playing with it and not so concerned with coming up with a coherent story as I was with just trying to see what I could get out of the tool. And I have the guards held spears of still living wood tipped with sharp crystals that glowed faintly. Alaric introduced himself, declaring his intent to seek the court. So forth. It gives me this introduction scene. It gives me this nice description of the guards and their armor. Their armor mirroring the forest hues with the deceptive delicacy of overlapping leaves scrutinized the approaching mage. So forth and so on. So basically he comes and he says, "I would like to go see the queen," and they allow him in. Here's the next scene, and I gave a longer prompt here, and as you can see, when I end up with a longer prompt, that usually means that I tried something shorter and it didn't work out the way that I wanted it to. Like in this one, basically it's a little bit shorter. Let's see if I can remember what was the difference here. Skipping back over. In this one, basically, I had to go back and make it more specific. I had put specifics in here already about this character that I intended to include in the story. This Sylvaneth mage named Leora Silvershield, who is like a specialist in defensive magics, who's going to be a character that is going to sort of be in the hero's party as we get a little bit deeper into the tale. But I just wanted the main character to see her kind of in passing, so that we're going to actually meet her and talk to her a little bit more as we get further later on. And I didn't want the scene to unfold too quickly. So I think what has happened is when I didn't give specifics enough, it jumps the gun on things sometimes if you don't tell it specifically what needs to happen next. It'll jump pretty far ahead in how a scene would naturally unfold. So here we go. Alaric comes in, and he comes to the court of Queen Tatiana. Everything's nature-themed, and she's sitting in this she's sitting in this throne that's got all the affinities with nature. We pass this character named Leora Silvershield. And the character announces himself, and then the queen says back to him, "Alaric of the Summer Storm, your name precedes you, as does your tale of flight from the forces of Zerzak." This is a little bit of a continuity error in the story, because at least there's really no reason that the queen should know about this character fleeing from the forces of Zerzak unless somehow that previous elf that we met in the story was able to communicate that to the queen. And there's nothing in the story that suggested that has happened, and so here we are. "Hey, I'm recording. Give me a few minutes." Okay. So he presents the queen with the gifts. And then because it didn't really tell me what was going, didn't really tell me exactly what was going there. The queen hadn't responded. I prompted it by saying, Alaric waited in anticipation to see how the queen would respond, because I don't have any response yet. She needs to respond in some way, right? Otherwise, we have a scene with like, why is nothing happening? Then I put, if she accepted and asked what he sought, he'd tell her why he came, for asylum and for allies. And so basically, she says the gifts are accepted with honor, and says, we'll grant you asylum, kind of while we consider your request more carefully. And then Alaric is heading off to rest in his quarters. Okay, we come to this next part. And this is one where I also had to regenerate it, where we encounter that character that we passed earlier, Leora Silvershield. And initially I had given her a short prompt, but I ended up going back and giving a longer prompt because I wanted more specific things to happen in this, and I didn't want it to jump the gun too fast, right? If you don't give it specifics, sometimes it'll make the story move faster than it needs to move. So one of the things, for example, is I want these characters to link up and be in a group eventually, but I don't want them to just suddenly become fast friends for no reason. And that was something that had happened in a previous iteration. So I make this more of a scene where they're sort of encountering each other and speaking to one another, where we identify this character, Leora, and sort of come to get some basic ideas about her, but not too much more than that. Okay. And then the main character, Alaric, he goes to sleep for the night. And then they're awakened by what is going to be, we need some action to happen in the story, right? And we need there to be some conflict. That's another thing that the AI is not real great about, introducing conflict in a way that advances the story's sort of major plot elements. It doesn't really know what the plot elements are unless you tell them, and it's not necessarily good about the pacing of when things should happen. So in this case, we've come to the Queen's Court. We've met this character named she had a different name in a previous iteration, so I'm having a hard time remembering. Her name is, I believe it's Leora. And then there's this attack of these creatures, who are the demonic undead horde of Zarazak, the Demon King. Right, and I've got a couple of things going on here in this. I ended up redoing this prompt several times. This was the first iteration of the prompt. It was very short. Basically, I said, Alaric dismissed himself for the evening, went to his room to prepare for sleep. Night fell, horn sounded, signaling emergency. Glenspire Castle was under attack by the demonic horde. And so this basically happens, and it gives us this long scene where suddenly we've jumped into combat, and all these spells are flying around, and they're basically defeating the bad guys. It jumped into the action too fast, right? That was the problem here. We needed to ease in what's happening because there's some sort of an emergency. We wouldn't go from there's an emergency to suddenly we're in the middle of a battle. It's not good pacing, right? You need to build toward what's going to happen. Initially, when there's an alarm, there should be some confusion, right? We've got to leave the room and figure out what's going on before we just like suddenly jump into this giant battle. So I prompted a couple of times here. In the second iteration, I introduced another character that I plan to have in the story. I've got to figure out ways to introduce these characters into the story. In the first playthrough, I basically just had the queen assigned these characters as allies to the main character, which, I mean, it was fine for just playing through it and feeling out what the AI could do, but it didn't really narratively feel very good, right? It's better if you introduce the characters one at a time, so you have some time to come to grips with who they are, and you encounter them in ways that fit into the overarching narrative, right? So in this case, we introduce this character named Sir Cedric, who's going to be like the fighter of the group. We describe some basic stuff about him. He's like a heavy armor user who uses like a short sword and shield. He's an older guy, a seasoned warrior who's a wise and trusted advisor of the queen. Now this iteration worked out pretty well. And it came up with this really cool description. And by the way, I specifically told it to describe, see here it is, specifically describe the characteristics of the demonic undead in this scene. The problem if you don't tell it to specifically describe is it will describe things in ways that are very general and it won't necessarily pin down attributes or characteristics of creatures, right? It will talk about the undead as they're very frightening and imposing and they represent a threat, but it never tells you like what they look like, right? So that was why I told it to specifically describe these demonic undead, and it gave this really cool description. So here we go. I want to read this just because this was neat. The servitors were grotesque, their forms a macabre parody of the human shape, twisted and corrupted by dark magic. Their skin was pallid and taut over sharp, angular bones, with eyes that burned like coals in their sunken sockets. They moved with a jerky, unnatural speed, their limbs contorting eerily as they attacked. Each bore the marks of their damnation, chains wrapped around their limbs, etched with glowing runes, and their mouths were filled with sharp, jagged teeth that seemed capable of tearing through steel as easily as flesh. I thought that was a really cool description of these demonic undead. Looking a little bit further down here, they meet this character named Sir Cedric. And Sir Cedric says something here. I was mostly happy with this, but I changed just a little bit of it. I wanted to play out the conflict here and what happens, the drama of the scene with Sir Cedric, right? I want there to be a threat going on, and these two characters, Leora and Ilaric, intervene and help Sir Cedric, rather it just being a thing where we come into the scene and Sir Cedric has killed the bad guys and it's over. There needs to be a little bit of drama there, a little bit of tension, like, oh, something really bad is going to happen, and then the two characters come just in the nick of the time, and they save Sir Cedric, right? And then that is really kind of what contributes to them having their initial contact with one another, initially establishing this relationship between these characters. So I added a little bit more here. I actually told it to preserve this description that I really liked from the second iteration, which it mostly did. It changed like one word in this version of it. But see how I gave specifics on how I wanted the scene to unfold here. Sir Cedric should be about to lose when Ilaric and Leora come to his aid. There was another problem also. In the second iteration, it referred to Sir Cedric without us having been introduced to him, which is a little bit of a continuity error. Why do we know what this character's name is if we've never seen him before, right? So I said, do not refer to Sir Cedric by his name until he introduces himself after the minions of Zarazek are defeated. And then I also told it how to close the scene. The scene closes with Sir Cedric remarking that the alarm originated from inside the castle and that they should go to the queen. And that moves us to the next part of the story. This is something that's advancing some story elements and some plot points that I worked out when in a previous iteration of the story. There is a little bit of a continuity error here that I noticed as well, or just something that's kind of an inconsistency. Sir Cedric has this comment: These foul creatures breach the castle walls, and I fear for her safety," referring to the queen. But then we have the alarm sounded from within the castle. Well, if the alarm sounded from within the castle, then how does that connect to the creatures breaching the castle walls, right? If the alarm is from within the castle, then the creatures got in somehow without an attack on the walls. So there's little things that come up like that, where when you generate scenes using the AI, you have to go back and just say, does this actually make sense? Because it's generally pretty good, but every once in a while it doesn't. So in any case, those are my experiences. That's sort of my initial wisdom from prompting the AI to come up with a story. If you're interested in reading how the story came together, first pop me a like and a subscribe. I would sure love, if enough people are interested, to make another one of these and to continue the story. And as a bonus, I will throw in the description of this video a link to the document itself that has the text here if you'd like to just read it. And also, I used another AI tool to generate audio files, so if you would like to listen to this first part of the story here like an audiobook, you can download those audio files and listen to it that way. So again, I'm Aaron. Thanks for joining me as we've been learning about how to use AI to write a fantasy story. Have a great day.